So goes without saying, probably to this group, that the Arctic is a place where there's significant change happening, and that significant change is influencing the need for research to respond. And so the new Arctic Research Plan, which was released in December of last year of 2021, is a bold new vision for federal agencies to nimbly and collaboratively help understand and support resilience in the face of these changes. And the graphic here is the cover on the report, and it reflects the more holistic approach of the new plan. And we want to thank the artist Molly Trainor from Nome, Alaska, for this very detailed illustration. And the more I look at it, the more detail I see, which is really cool. So with that, this graphic, if you took part in the plan development process, will probably look familiar to you, but it's been updated. The top section shows the 4 policy drivers. That is areas where the Arctic research, supports US policy. These are pretty stable drivers of Arctic policy over the last decade or so. And these are directly connected to the other elements of the plan. You can see where with the icons. In the center, in red, you'll see the 4 priority areas in the new Arctic Research Plan. The priority areas represent areas of broad, cross-cutting research focus, and each has a goal that drives the plan. The priority areas are community, resilience and health, Arctic system interactions, sustainable economies and livelihoods, and risk and hazard mitigation. Below the priority areas in blue are foundational activities. And these activities are essential to achieving the priority areas and will remain foundational to Arctic research beyond the duration of the 5-year Arctic Research Plan. They are data management, education, training, and capacity building, monitoring, and observing, modeling, and prediction, participatory research, and Indigenous leadership in research, technology, innovation, and application. And for the purpose of this meeting, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on the foundational activities, but if you're interested in what those foundational activities are proposing for the implementation of this plan, please let me know and I can direct you to where you can find more information there. And the Arctic Research Plan, as I mentioned, is a high-level plan. And so it needs more detail and more implementation specifics to become really usable for the research community and for communities in general. So the implementation has shifted. IARPIC is moving to a biennial implementation process. And so with the hopes that this biennial, so once every 2 years, will be more flexible and will allow for emerging issues to be addressed. And so it's an exciting time to be involved in IARPIC with this shift, and we see this new approach to implementation as a big step to be more responsive to emerging research questions and to engage new people across federal agencies, as well as those outside of the federal sphere. And here's just an overview of the timeline for this process. So as I mentioned, in December, the Arctic Research Plan was released. I'll put a link in the chat if you want to read that plan in more detail. Right now, we're in the January through March 2022 period where we're hosting public meetings like this one to solicit ideas on specific topics to be pursued within each priority area. And then we'll move on to drafting of the implementation plan with a release around September of 2022. So today we are getting into the weeds with the terrestrial ecosystem team on what specific objectives and deliverables this team might be interested in pursuing under the next Arctic Research Plan. Thanks, Liz, for dropping that in the chat. And so some definitions here of objective, just so we're all kind of on the same page. Objectives are specific research actions that advance the goals of the Arctic Research Plan, and deliverables are tangible, measurable, and easily communicated research products that demonstrate progress made towards satisfying the objectives and goals and are made available to relevant decision makers and partners, and that they could include achievements resulting from the establishment of new relationships. Okay, and so I will briefly run through the priority areas and the draft objectives that have been, that the drafting teams are suggesting at the moment, just so you kind of have some more context of where things are going. We're still in the early phases of drafting these objectives and deliverables, and that's why we're hosting this conversation today to help shape how those form. So the priority area 1, community resilience and health, their goal is to improve community resilience and well-being by strengthening research and developing tools to increase understanding of interdependent social, natural, and built systems in the Arctic. Here are their draft objectives. The co-leads for that team are David Pear with the National Park Service and Susan Van Derick with the EPA. They are considering objectives on evaluating threats to food safety and security and developing solutions. This includes availability of and access to subsistence resources and impacts of climate change, contaminants, and harmful algal blooms. They are interested in supporting physical and mental health of Arctic residents through research on public health needs, disparities, and delivery, including COVID-19, endemic preparedness, zoonotic diseases, and access to mental health services, supporting cultural well-being and resilience through preservation of traditions, language, culture, and recording and sharing traditional knowledge related information to community resilience. And also promoting research on access to safe and reliable infrastructure relevant to human health and well-being. The second priority area, Arctic systems interactions, the goal is to enhance our ability to observe, understand, predict, and project the Arctic's dynamic interconnected systems and their links to the Earth system. You can see the co-leads of this team at the top. I won't read through all of them. And their draft objectives right now center around Arctic amplification and global connections, Arctic ecosystem change research, and ice, atmosphere, ocean, land interactions. And there might be someone on the call who can speak a little bit more to those if you have questions. Priority area 3, sustainable economies and livelihoods, with the goal to observe and understand the Arctic's natural, social, and built systems to promote sustainable economies and livelihoods. They are looking at research that is planned and needed, including ecosystem health assessments, models and forecasts, community economic priorities, mapping and leveraging available capacity, and understanding community and regional intersections and dependencies. And this last priority area, risk management and hazard mitigation, goal is to secure and improve the quality of life through research that promotes an understanding of disaster, risk, exposure, sensitivity to hazard, and adaptive capacity. And the research questions that this team is looking at, and again, you can see the co-leads at the top there. What data, tools, and technologies are needed to increase understanding of Arctic ecosystems to improve hazard mitigation and adaptive capacity? How can we better share this data and information? how do we increase our understanding of how environmental change will affect current and future adaptive capacity and resiliency? And finally, how can we understand how hazards, acute and chronic, will affect critical infrastructure and vice versa? So again, all of these draft objectives are drafts and are general areas that the priority area teams are considering moving forward. And we're really interested in more thoughts on any or all of these. And here I've just put the foundational activities again. And like I said, if you want more information on what draft objectives these teams are working up, please let me know and I'll point you to that information. And with that, just some general discussion questions. Happy to answer any other questions as I can. And we'll turn it over to the terrestrial ecosystems co-leads.
Thanks so much, Meredith. I really appreciate your introduction. And I guess the reason that we wanted to have this meeting today, where we kind of asked for input from our terrestrial ecosystems community, is that now that we have this new Arctic research plan out and teams are working on the BIP, the implementation plan for this, we have an opportunity to kind of help our team think about where we move forward the best and how we kind of incorporate research that's going on in the community or new research plans that are happening, and how we kind of help to look at that across each agency. So it's not just what NASA is doing or what USGS is doing, and we have a laundry list of activities that are happening, but it's how do we think about how these different pieces fit together. And Jeremy's been a co-lead on this team for a number of years and has been, I think, working towards this for a while. If you want to add a little bit too.
Yeah, thanks, Meredith, for that that overview, and Liz for picking it up there. It can be mind-bending to try and wrap your head around all of this at once in relation to what you as a researcher do, or you and your collaborative networks, and how that fits into broader Arctic policy. And I've been, as Liz mentioned, I've been doing this for a while and still don't have my head completely wrapped around it. I put in the chat the performance elements for the terrestrial team. These are things that were identified as kind of overarching places where we could work and things to work toward under prior research plans. And we're navigating now how they may change and how they align with the priority areas under the new plan. And I think it's our general consensus that these things still work for us, broadly speaking anyway. And I think a lot of you will see, reflections of the work that you already do in those performance elements. And so what we're interested in engaging from you is how the terrestrial collaboration team might better facilitate the work that it does going forward, ways that it could better align, with these new performance, priority areas. But then also just any ideas you have for making all of this work better as well. So we want to get your input rather than making any kind of direct decisions as a set of team leaders on how we're going to go forward. And yeah.
We had a survey that we sent out to the community ahead of time to all of you, and we did not get a very high percentage of people responding back. So but I wonder if we can share that out right now too. Meredith, maybe you should share it, because I'm afraid if I share it, I'll share not the right link for it. But the idea with this survey was just to ask all of you if you had any ideas based on what the different goals are for each, let's see, what do we call them? Priority areas. For each priority area, they have those different goals that Meredith showed you. And so we're trying to figure out where do terrestrial ecosystems fit within those different goals. And so if you have kind of new research that you want to highlight, or have something that you feel our community needs to think about, on a broader level, this would be a good place to include it. You can put it in the survey. You don't have to fill out all of the different items in the survey. It's a little long, but it tries to go through each goal, and then kind of you can give opinions on each of those goals. So you can still fill it out if you'd like, and we'll still keep an eye on it. I think that to add anything to the BIP, I think, wasn't it, Meredith, that we needed to provide any input we had by the end of March or something?
That's correct. Yes. All public input we will be getting by the end of March, and then the federal team leaders of the different collaboration teams and priority area teams will be connecting and moving those pieces forward.
Okay. So does anyone have anything to start us off? Otherwise, I think maybe what we could do is kind of work through some of the questions we had put in that survey and kind of have discussions surrounding them, or we could look at our performance elements and have a discussion and lead us, use the performance elements to lead us through a discussion. Jeremy, I see you put something in the chat too.
Yeah, I just added in the chat that, we could be content. A lot of what we do, a lot of the research that goes on in this community fits pretty well under Arctic system interactions, whether it's your interest in permafrost carbon flux and vegetation changes and how that affects the atmosphere, or how wildfires and vegetation respond, to climate, or how, human communities around the Arctic, respond to the challenges that they're faced with. All of that fits well under Arctic system interactions. But if we have more participation from people who want to look at other aspects in more detail, or if the priority areas for hazards and infrastructure, for example, or community well-being, things like that, are more the focus of some of that research, then it would be good for us to know that so that we plan ahead for it as well. Our perspectives are only one in the mix, and I think we tend to fall back on those first. But if there are other ideas, we definitely want to hear them.
And for example, next month we have a speaker, Tatiana Laboda, who's doing work on the intersection of fire disturbance and human health. And so her talk will kind of cross-cut both of those issues, which I think, it's certainly arts and systems interactions, but it also kind of fits under some of the community related and the health related priority areas too. So other research like that you want us to be aware of can be helpful, even as we're thinking about other speakers to invite throughout the year. I think it's really useful. So if anyone has a comment, we've talked a lot.
Hi, it's Mike Falkowski. I'm going to keep my camera off just because of where I am, but yeah, so I used to be a co-lead of this team, and I'm now one of the co-leads for Priority Area 2 for the Biennial Implementation Planning process. And I agree that everything that you said about a lot of what has been done and what will be done in this collaboration team fits well under PA2. And so, from what I recall from the performance elements, I see a really nice transition into PA2 with everything that was currently existing. So anyways, I'm just here to kind of hear what you guys are thinking and hear what the community has to say. So yeah, thanks for putting this together.
Well, thanks, Mike, for chipping in. It's good to hear your voice again, even if we can't see you. Yeah, and agreed that under the prior plan and prior emphases of this group, that would be the logical transition. I guess I'm curious if anyone out there sees anything else in addition to, maybe not supplanting that, but we're happy to entertain that.
And I'll just make another comment from NASA's perspective, and specifically from the Above program. And Liz is aware of all this as well, that we're going to be entering phase 3 of Above, and so we're really getting into the stage of synthesis activities. So trying to put everything together that we've learned through the last 2 phases of Above, the last 6 years. and then also delve more into impacts on communities a little bit. And so I agree with the comment that Liz just said about the talk from Tatiana next week, and I think, or next month, I guess it is, and looking how changes in ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, has an impact on people, and so those are some avenues that we're going to be going down through the above program. So I think there is some room there, at least to intersect with some of the other priority areas as well that are more focused on the human impact.
And I think some of the objectives that we already have listed on the list that Jeremy put in the chat, I think they will kind of above the research that will come out of phase 3 above will help to meet some of the needs of these different objectives, such as there's one about coordinating research on observations, geospatial data, and model improvement. That's looking at fire emissions and atmospheric carbon budgets and climate feedback. So I think that above phase 3 will work towards some of that. And there's a few others, but I wonder, Jeremy, if we could kind of open up some of those objectives and take a look at them, and people could say if they had any, if their own research they thought was towards meeting them, or we could look back at our survey to see if anybody on the call had thoughts about it. What do you think?
I think either of those are good perspectives. I would like to hear other voices. It looks like we don't have a lot of folks on the, one of the things that we historically haven't spent as much time on, at least the last 5 or 6 years, are the other aspects of our work that are relevant to communities in the Arctic. Mike was just talking about that a little bit, but the performance elements, especially in the second and third group for the terrestrial ecosystems, there's some emphasis on subsistence resources. There's some emphasis specifically on wildfire impacts on communities, and that there's a sort of groundswell of thinking and also messages on how better to incorporate indigenous or traditional knowledges in the work that we do and in research in general. And if anybody has perspectives on that, that would also be welcome. I just wanted to put that placeholder out there in case anybody was feeling like they were in the wrong room and that's their emphasis. That'd be good to hear as well. But yeah, we could revisit the survey and see what anybody on the call has to say, or go through the performance elements. It might be somewhat painful to do that without any dialogue, but
well, maybe let's look back at the survey. Even if you're newer to this field, it's okay to have some opinions on it, and we really are. This is an opportunity for everyone to kind of contribute and share any thoughts they have about even their own research. So you can feel free to toot your own horn a little bit today, talk about kind of what you're doing and how you think it can be relevant in this team. And if you want to give a talk later on, you can kind of let us know that too.
Would you like me to share the screen with the survey on it?
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds
That'd be helpful. Thanks, Meredith. I opened it up and it's paradoxical at first because you have to click another button to keep going, right? And so folks might not see that.
So, yep. So here is the goal for community resilience and health, and then here are the draft objectives that we walked through earlier. And so the survey just asks if you have any work that's happening or should happen under these draft objectives related to terrestrial ecosystems teams. And if you want me to start with the Arctic system interactions ones where there might be a little bit more for those.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good.
Those are here.
We did get some responses on this one, I think. Let me see. We did get a response in the survey already talking about work being done to improve data collection and modeling on CO2 and CH4 fluxes across Arctic ecosystems, where a group is establishing a new flux sites across the Arctic and working with data providers to synthesize flux data, as well as building a data assimilation model for Arctic boreal fluxes and integrating key processes such as fire, abrupt thaw, methane dynamics, and terrestrial aquatic linkages. So I think that was interesting that a group is working on that, and they offered to present at some point in the future, so we might take them up on that. And I think that type of work certainly would fit in with the current performance elements we have. I think we have a lot of performance elements also. Or no, is that the right word for them? Yeah, performance
Yes,
elements.
we have a lot of performance elements.
And I think that's going to be our challenges over the next 5 years of this plan or so. How do we, or in the next few years, how do we as a team kind of focus our efforts? And do we focus on specific performance elements? Or do we need to take some of these performance elements away? So that's where my thoughts are helpful. This one on Arctic amplification and mid-latitude connections, both in terms of atmosphere and ocean, the implications of Arctic change on ocean circulation, interactions among ice, atmosphere, ocean, and land. For example, the role of sea ice in ocean ecosystems health, as well as food security. I don't know of as much research around that kind of goal. I don't know, Jeremy, do you? Can think of like coastal permafrost work and
most of what I'm familiar is either ecosystem fluxes. So in other words, what happens, what the fate of permafrost and other sources of carbon dioxide and methane in the Arctic and how they affect global climate. And the other is more of an atmospheric sciences focus on the way that circulation changes respond to sea ice and warming of the planet in general, and how what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic in terms of weather. You hear that fairly frequently as well. I think it's kind of telling that, like in the last National Climate Assessment, so NCA 4, there was a sort of science-y prelude to that, the Climate Science Special Report, and it had a whole chapter on this idea. Well, not a whole chapter, a large fraction of a chapter on this idea that what happens in the Arctic has implications for the rest of the planet, and especially the mid-latitudes in the Northern Hemisphere. And that's absent this time. That's not even I mean, I guess it's assumed that that's still important and that whatever was in that report stands and that it hasn't been modified. But I don't think we hear as much about it, especially in our team. I think the permafrost team has spent some time on this, but not as much. So yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jeremy. When we, as PAT team, we're coming up with this, we're largely thinking about sort of the atmospheric circulation and the impact, how Arctic changes and how that impacts latitude, weather at the mid-latitudes, but also thinking about natural sources of carbon emissions from permafrost or otherwise in the Arctic and how that influences the global carbon cycle. These are all, that one in particular is an area where I think the terrestrial ecosystems team and people working in that vein could contribute.
I think there's a good opportunity to kind of cross over with some of the other teams there too. We're looking at atmosphere and the ice, ocean kind of. There's other teams that are addressing some of these aspects, and so it's a good opportunity for maybe some collaboration within some of these teams too, or some joint meetings and discussion.
Yeah, I agree. And then also with this new interagency working group on greenhouse gas emissions, I think there's a lot of interest in better quantifying natural sources of carbon emissions and how that might change in the future. So, I think some continued collaboration between the TECT and the permafrost team is also a really good idea. Could produce some interesting meetings.
Yeah, and I think another maybe a more direct researchy element of that is for a long time, in the like in the temperate forest literature, there was the back and forth about whether it was the emissions associated with initial changes in harvest of forests, for example, or the long-term emissions that you got from the below ground component of that over time. Which of those is most important? How does that figure into long-term carbon balances? And I think with wildfires in the Arctic, in the last couple of years, it's been primarily in high latitude Russia, but in years prior to that, it was Alaska and Canada and Fennoscandia as well. So it seems to kind of go around. But in places where the permafrost response after fire is a long lag effect of that, I think there's a lot of cool research going on right now in that, and that's really complicated. You have to have, at least 3 of the collaboration teams working together on that to really corral the ongoing research. And I guess it's worth noting too, I know there's a couple of people on the call who are working on wildfires. Wildfires was its own sort of special team for a while in the past. I don't remember, Meredith, what those were called, but it got absorbed into the terrestrial team under the last plan, and has been the focus of a lot of the work that we do, though by no means all of it. And so I expect that'll remain an active part of what we do for certain.
I think that's part of the reason that some of the objectives or the performance elements are even specifically geared towards fire. I think that maybe some of them carried over from when we had a fire team. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't want to keep people if there's nothing more to say. We will take the feedback we did get from the survey, and if anyone still wants to fill it out, you can feel free to do so. We have until I think the end of the month to really turn anything in if our team wants to add anything, add our thoughts to the current discussions that are taking place. So please let us know. And as I said, next month it would be come back and you'll hear a presentation by Tatiana Laboda on fire disturbance and human health, and her efforts in Alaska doing that, her team's efforts. And hopefully we can kind of start thinking about, as a team, how do we move forward and think about the intersection of some of these dynamic aspects of Arctic research and policy. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Meredith, for presenting. Jeremy, if you had.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.